The Murdaugh family name is synonymous with power, influence, and authority in the Lowcountry region of South Carolina. For over a century, this family dominated the legal system, weaving themselves into the very fabric of the local judicial and political landscape. From prosecutors to prominent attorneys, the Murdaughs became more than just a family, they became an institution. Their influence extended far beyond the courtroom, shaping the lives of residents, the outcomes of critical legal cases, and even the reputation of the region itself. It all began decades ago, with Randolph Murdaugh Sr., who laid the foundation of a dynasty that would carry his name through generations. The family's involvement in law enforcement and prosecution created a legacy of authority that was nearly untouchable. Over time, the Murdaughs cultivated a network of power that ensured their dominance in legal and social circles. Their name commanded respect, sometimes fear, and they became the central figures in a community where knowing the right people could make or break your life. The power wielded by the Murdaugh family wasn't merely inherited, it was carefully nurtured. They understood the intricate balance between law, politics, and public perception. By the time Alex Murdaugh, one of the most prominent members of the family, came of age, he inherited not just a profession but an empire built on decades of influence. For the residents of the Lowcountry, a Murdaugh in the room often meant that justice, in its truest sense, was complicated. The family's reach into law enforcement, courts, and local government created a reality where their decisions and actions could ripple through the community unchecked. Yet, for all the prestige and respectability, the Murdaugh family's story was never purely about honor and service. Behind the polished exterior, there were whispers of misconduct, favoritism, and ethical boundaries pushed to their limits. Rumors of financial mismanagement, legal manipulation, and personal indiscretion circulated quietly for years, dismissed by many as small blemishes on an otherwise storied legacy. For decades, their immense power seemed to shield them from consequences. The family's influence created a perception of invincibility, a sense that they were untouchable, no matter the allegations or the evidence against them. The story of the Murdaughs is also a story of generational pressure. Each successive member of the family was expected to uphold the name, maintain the dynasty, and navigate the delicate balance between public admiration and private scrutiny. With every passing generation, the stakes grew higher. Mistakes were not easily forgiven, and the weight of a centuries-old legacy created pressures that few outsiders could understand. To the public, the Murdaughs represented prestige and authority. To themselves, the name carried both a privilege and an obligation, one that shaped their choices, their relationships, and their very lives. But perhaps the most important aspect of the Murdaugh legacy is the duality it represents. On one hand, they were pillars of the community, philanthropists, and respected legal professionals. On the other hand, this same legacy would set the stage for scandal, tragedy, and criminal investigation. Their story serves as a cautionary tale about how absolute power, when combined with secrecy and privilege, can create a house of cards, beautiful and impressive on the outside, yet fragile and vulnerable beneath the surface. Ultimately, the Murdaugh family's legacy is inseparable from the events that would later shock the nation. The same name that once commanded respect would come to be associated with unimaginable tragedy, deception, and betrayal. Understanding the Murdaugh legacy is not just about tracing a family's history, it is about comprehending the environment of power, influence, and secrecy that allowed events to unfold in ways that no one could have imagined. And it is this very foundation that makes the story of the Murdaugh murders not just a crime story, but a tale of generational power, privilege, and the dark consequences that come when that power is abused. The night of June 7, 2021, began like any other in the quiet town of Islandton, South Carolina. But for the Murdaugh family, it would mark the beginning of a nightmare that would shock the nation. Paul Murdaugh, the youngest son of the family, and his mother, Maggie Murdaugh, were found brutally murdered on the family's sprawling estate. The shocking nature of the crime would immediately send ripples through the community, turning whispers of scandal into a full-blown media frenzy. Paul and Maggie's bodies were discovered by authorities under circumstances that were as chilling as they were mysterious. Paul, a 22-year-old college student, had his whole life ahead of him. Maggie, a devoted mother and pillar in her community, had long been a figure of warmth and respect. Their deaths were sudden, violent, and utterly inexplicable to a town that had long viewed the Murdaughs as untouchable. The discovery of their bodies left neighbors in disbelief, friends in mourning, and the wider public in shock. How could such a tragedy strike a family so seemingly protected by wealth, influence, and power? As investigators descended on the scene, details began to emerge that painted a grim picture. The crime scene was meticulously examined, every corner of the property scrutinized for evidence. Neighbors recounted seeing unusual activity that night, lights in the distance, cars moving slowly along the estate, and a silence that seemed almost unnatural. Authorities worked tirelessly to piece together a timeline, attempting to understand the moments leading up to the murders. Every clue, every small detail, seemed to point toward an unsettling reality: these murders were not random. The impact of the murders extended far beyond the immediate family. The town, once proud of the Murdaugh legacy, was forced to confront a reality it had long ignored: the power and privilege of the family could not shield them from tragedy. Locals struggled with disbelief, anger, and fear. Rumors began to circulate, fueled by the mysterious circumstances surrounding the deaths. Was this an act of revenge, a targeted attack, or something far more sinister? Each theory added layers of tension to a community already grappling with the shock of losing two of its own in such a violent manner. National media quickly picked up the story, and what had started as a local tragedy became a case that captured the attention of the entire country. News outlets ran headlines highlighting the prominence of the family, the brutality of the murders, and the many unanswered questions surrounding the case. Social media platforms buzzed with speculation, and experts were called in to analyze every possible angle, from forensic evidence to potential motives. The story of Paul and Maggie Murdaugh had become more than just a murder case; it had become a national conversation about privilege, power, and the fragility of human life. As the investigation unfolded, one thing became clear: the Murdaugh murders were just the tip of a much larger, darker story. Beneath the surface of this family's wealth and influence lay secrets that would soon come to light, secrets that would complicate the search for justice and challenge the perception of a family once thought untouchable. The tragedy of Paul and Maggie's deaths would not only leave a grieving community in its wake, but also serve as the catalyst for uncovering a series of shocking revelations about the Murdaugh family, their legacy, and the lengths some would go to protect it. The murders of Paul and Maggie Murdaugh were more than just a crime; they were the unraveling of a family dynasty. And as investigators continued to dig deeper, the nation would come to see that in the world of power, privilege, and secrecy, no one is truly untouchable. The story of that fateful night is not just about death; it is about betrayal, mystery, and the beginning of a dark journey that would expose the hidden skeletons of a family long thought untouchable. At the center of the Murdaugh Murders saga stands Alex Murdaugh, the patriarch of the family and a man whose life and actions have become almost as infamous as the tragedy itself. Alex was not just a son, a father, or a husband; he was a figure who embodied the family's legacy of power, influence, and privilege. For decades, he practiced law in the very courts his ancestors had helped shape, seemingly carrying the weight of the family name with pride and authority. But behind the polished image of a respected attorney lay a complex and increasingly troubled individual whose actions would blur the lines between tragedy, scandal, and criminality. Alex's involvement in the events surrounding the murders was far from straightforward. In the immediate aftermath of Paul and Maggie's deaths, he presented the face of a grieving father, publicly mourning the loss of his family. News footage captured him standing solemnly before cameras, speaking softly about the pain of losing his loved ones. To the public, he was a man shattered by tragedy, a figure whose sorrow seemed genuine and relatable. But as investigations deepened, cracks began to appear in the narrative he presented. The complexities of Alex's role are tied not just to grief, but to the shadow of controversy and the long history of alleged misconduct that had followed the Murdaugh family for years. In the months and years leading up to the murders, Alex had become embroiled in financial scandals, including allegations of embezzlement, insurance fraud, and misappropriation of client funds. These revelations cast a long shadow over his reputation and raised uncomfortable questions: could a man so entrenched in power and privilege also be capable of deceit and manipulation? And more importantly, did these financial and legal controversies intersect in some way with the tragedy that had befallen his family? Investigators soon began scrutinizing Alex's actions not only as a grieving father but also as a central figure in the complex web of legal and financial entanglements surrounding the family. His movements, communications, and decisions were meticulously analyzed, from the night of the murders to the handling of family assets and legal matters. Every interview, every bank record, and every reported conversation became a piece of the puzzle that authorities hoped would reveal the truth behind the Murdaugh dynasty's darkest chapter. Public perception of Alex shifted dramatically as more information came to light. Once seen as a respected member of the legal community, he became a symbol of the dangerous intersection of wealth, influence, and secrecy. Social media and news outlets dissected his every move, turning him into a central figure in a story that seemed stranger than fiction. Commentators, true crime experts, and the public debated his potential involvement in ways both direct and indirect, raising questions about morality, accountability, and the corrupting influence of power. Yet, it's important to recognize that Alex's story is not just one of suspicion or scandal, it's also a deeply human narrative of complexity. He was a man shaped by legacy, expectation, and privilege, navigating pressures that few could comprehend. His actions, whether driven by desperation, grief, or ambition, illustrate how the weight of family, fame, and fortune can shape decisions in ways that are both tragic and morally ambiguous. In the saga of the Murdaugh Murders, Alex Murdaugh is both central character and enigma. His role forces the nation to confront uncomfortable truths about wealth, justice, and accountability. The story of Alex is not simply about a father mourning his children, it is about a man whose power, privilege, and secrets collided with tragedy in ways that would forever alter the perception of the family name. Understanding Alex Murdaugh is essential to understanding the larger narrative, a narrative where wealth and influence can protect, but also entangle, and where the line between victim and perpetrator can blur in ways no one could have anticipated. Beneath the grandeur and prestige of the Murdaugh family name lay a web of legal and financial scandals that would eventually shock the nation. For decades, the Murdaughs were seen as untouchable, a family whose influence stretched through the courts, law offices, and local government of South Carolina. But over time, cracks began to appear in that facade, revealing a side of the family that few had imagined, one entangled in deceit, manipulation, and outright criminal activity. Central to these scandals was Alex Murdaugh himself. The once respected attorney faced multiple allegations of embezzlement, misappropriation of client funds, and insurance fraud. Reports indicated that Alex had siphoned millions from his own law firm and from the estates of clients who had trusted him implicitly. These actions, once hidden behind layers of legal complexity and family influence, began to unravel, exposing a man who had lived a double life, respected publicly, but accused privately of betraying the very system he was sworn to uphold. One of the most shocking elements of the Murdaugh financial scandals involved insurance fraud schemes. Investigators alleged that Alex had orchestrated attempts to collect life insurance payouts through staged events, a revelation that stunned both the legal community and the public at large. These schemes illustrated not just greed, but a deep sense of entitlement, an assumption that power and influence could shield him from accountability. In the process, the public began to question the true cost of wealth and privilege, and how far someone might go to maintain their lifestyle and protect their family's image. The financial scandals were intertwined with legal manipulations that further complicated the family's story. For years, the Murdaughs had wielded their influence to shape outcomes in the legal system, creating a culture where accountability often seemed optional. Allegations surfaced suggesting that Alex's connections within law enforcement and the courts had been used to conceal misconduct, delay investigations, and manipulate outcomes in ways that benefited the family. In a system designed to uphold justice, the very individuals entrusted with enforcing the law appeared to be operating above it. As these revelations became public, the media and investigators began connecting the dots between financial misconduct, legal manipulation, and the broader tragedies surrounding the family. Paul and Maggie Murdaugh's murders, once considered isolated acts of violence, now existed within a context of greed, secrecy, and moral corruption. Each new piece of evidence suggested that the family's legacy of power had created vulnerabilities, not just for the victims, but for the perpetrators themselves. The same influence that had shielded them for decades had also set the stage for their downfall. Public fascination grew as the story unfolded. Social media buzzed with commentary, podcasts dissected every transaction, and news outlets published detailed reports on the layers of deception that surrounded the family. The Murdaugh scandals became a case study in how unchecked power and privilege can foster an environment ripe for abuse, where even the most respected institutions can be manipulated for personal gain. Ultimately, the legal and financial scandals of the Murdaugh family are more than a tale of crime, they are a window into the corrosive effects of wealth and influence when combined with secrecy. They demonstrate how a family that once symbolized authority and prestige could become synonymous with deceit and moral compromise. And as investigators continued to peel back the layers of this complex web, the public began to understand that the Murdaugh murders were not just a tragic event, but the inevitable consequence of a legacy built on power, privilege, and hidden corruption. The Murdaugh murders were shocking on their own, but the way the story exploded in the media transformed a local tragedy into a national spectacle. From the moment Paul and Maggie Murdaugh were found dead, news outlets across South Carolina, and soon the entire United States, descended on the small town of Islandton. Cameras lined the streets, reporters knocked on doors, and headlines splashed the family's name across newspapers, television screens, and online platforms. What had once been a quiet, close-knit community suddenly became ground zero for one of the most sensational true crime stories in recent memory. Social media amplified the story in ways no one could have anticipated. Platforms like Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok were flooded with theories, speculation, and commentary from both journalists and the public. Every detail of the case was dissected: the timing of the murders, the family's wealth, Alex Murdaugh's involvement, and the broader history of scandal surrounding the family. Memes and viral posts spread rapidly, some informed, some speculative, but all contributing to a growing public fascination with the case. The Murdaugh name became synonymous not only with tragedy, but with intrigue, secrecy, and scandal. The media frenzy also intensified scrutiny on local authorities and the investigation itself. Journalists questioned every decision made by law enforcement, from the handling of the crime scene to the timing of arrests and the release of information to the public. Legal experts weighed in on televised panels, analyzing evidence, discussing potential motives, and debating the likelihood of various scenarios. The Murdaugh murders, once a deeply personal tragedy, had become a public narrative, with millions of viewers following every update as if it were a serialized drama. Public outcry grew alongside media coverage. Residents of South Carolina and viewers across the nation were stunned not only by the murders but by the layers of corruption, financial fraud, and family secrets that had come to light. Many expressed frustration and anger at a system that seemed to allow such misconduct to go unchecked for years. Discussions about privilege, accountability, and justice became central to the story, turning the case into a broader conversation about power and inequality in America. True crime enthusiasts, journalists, and armchair detectives alike dissected the story relentlessly. Podcasts dedicated episodes to analyzing evidence, YouTube channels uploaded documentary-style breakdowns, and forums became hotbeds of discussion. Each new development, whether a court filing, a police statement, or a financial revelation, sent waves of speculation through the public consciousness. The story became more than news, it became a cultural phenomenon, highlighting how wealth, power, and tragedy can captivate a nation. Yet, amid the frenzy, there was also a deeply human element. Families mourned, friends grieved, and a community struggled to reconcile the public spectacle with the private pain of loss. The Murdaugh murders became a case study not only in crime and corruption but in the consequences of turning personal tragedy into national entertainment. The world watched as the lines between journalism, public curiosity, and sensationalism blurred, raising questions about media ethics and the impact of relentless coverage on justice and grieving families. In the end, the media frenzy and public outcry surrounding the Murdaugh murders amplified the story in unprecedented ways. It transformed a local tragedy into a national obsession, bringing attention to the dark undercurrents of wealth, power, and secrecy. And as the story unfolded on screens, in newspapers, and online, one thing became clear: the Murdaugh murders were no longer just a local mystery, they had become a cautionary tale of how influence and notoriety can turn tragedy into a spectacle watched by millions. Even as the nation absorbed the shocking details of the Murdaugh murders, investigators continued their painstaking work, determined to uncover the truth behind the deaths of Paul and Maggie Murdaugh. The case, already complicated by the family's legacy of power, wealth, and influence, required meticulous attention to every detail. Every phone record, financial transaction, and witness statement was scrutinized to ensure that justice could be served. From the very beginning, law enforcement faced immense pressure. The public demanded answers, the media demanded updates, and every action taken by authorities was under intense scrutiny. Detectives worked tirelessly, piecing together timelines, examining forensic evidence, and revisiting every lead, no matter how small. In a case where privilege and secrecy had long protected the family, investigators were faced with the daunting task of navigating a complex web of influence while maintaining impartiality. As the investigation unfolded, new revelations continued to emerge. Alex Murdaugh's financial crimes, his alleged involvement in insurance fraud, and the history of the family's legal manipulations all became part of the larger narrative surrounding the murders. Prosecutors and investigators began connecting these elements, seeking to understand not only the immediate events of that fateful night but also the broader context of the family's behavior and how it may have contributed to the tragedy. The legal proceedings became a national spectacle in their own right. Courtrooms were filled with tension, as attorneys, witnesses, and experts presented evidence that shed light on years of misconduct and deceit. Each hearing, each filing, and each revelation brought the public closer to understanding the full scope of the Murdaugh saga. Questions of accountability, morality, and justice dominated discussions both inside and outside the courtroom, challenging assumptions about power, privilege, and the rule of law. At the same time, the community grappled with the emotional aftermath of the murders. Residents of Island Ton and the surrounding areas struggled to reconcile the public spectacle with the personal grief that had touched their lives. Families, friends, and neighbors watched as the legal system worked to uncover the truth, hoping that justice would bring closure, accountability, and a measure of peace to those affected. Yet, the pursuit of justice in the Murdaugh case is far from simple. The intersection of wealth, influence, and criminal behavior has created a complex legal landscape. Prosecutors face challenges in presenting evidence that can withstand intense scrutiny, while defense attorneys navigate the same web of influence to protect their clients' rights. Every step of the investigation and trial underscores a critical truth: in a system where power can shield wrongdoing, achieving justice requires perseverance, diligence, and unwavering commitment to the law. As the case continues to unfold, one lesson emerges clearly: the story of the Murdaugh murders is not just about the deaths of Paul and Maggie. It is about accountability, the consequences of unchecked privilege, and the lengths to which the legal system must go to uphold justice. The investigation remains active, evidence continues to be examined, and the nation watches closely, aware that the outcomes of this case will resonate far beyond the small town of Island Ton. Ultimately, the ongoing investigations and pursuit of justice serve as a reminder that no amount of wealth or influence can place someone beyond the reach of the law. The Murdaugh murders are a story of tragedy, corruption, and the relentless quest for truth, a story that continues to unfold, captivating the world and forcing society to confront uncomfortable questions about power, privilege, and justice in America.